there were 9 mines, each with at least 4 shafts, many with more than that. There's now 1. The gold mining industry clearly is on a downward trend. There's still a lot of gold under the ground in South Africa, but it's very, very deep. You can go below 5 kilometers, you can still get gold in South Africa, but going below 5 kilometers is very expensive. And at the same time, as a direct result of my conversations with Andries and Sakela, I helped draft a proposal to the NRF suggesting a comparison of the dying gold industry, focusing on Welkom and the booming platinum industry in Rustenburg. Andries helped with that proposal, as did Carl and May Hermanus, and I found an intellectual home in SWOP. But the real breakthrough to platinum in SWOP came at the International Mining History Conference in 2012, when Gavin Capps approached me with the suggestion that his potential Matisa project might find a home in SWOP. Gavin and I hit it off at once, and he sent on to me and to Carl some of his written stuff, including his PhD thesis. I was overwhelmed. This guy's been working for more than a decade in the platinum industry, and he's covered a huge range of aspects of platinum. Having Gavin become part of SWOP concretized our commitment to taking platinum very seriously indeed, although the research in Welkom also continues. And then it was not until after the Marikana events that I discovered that Paul Stewart, an old friend and a SWOP associate, had also been involved with platinum well before the Marikana events. And so now we're all here, along with a panoply of others, to wrestle with questions about platinum industry and the implications that have arisen from the Marikana massacre. Perhaps it would help if I take just a few minutes at the end of my opening remarks here to point up some of the differences that strike me and have struck me as I've turned from my 30-odd years of messing around with gold towards looking at the platinum industry. What are the differences? What are the important differences that I see, at any rate, coming from gold to moving towards understanding what's going on in the platinum mining industry? I'm going to leave aside, at least for the moment, differences specifically regarding labor organization, because I'm going to be dealing with that in my presentation at the tail end of tomorrow. But let me just try and talk about what seems to me to be striking differences between gold and capital as aspects of mining in South Africa. But first, it's very important to say, both are enormously capital intensive. Both are or were concentrations of ore, of metal, of available extractive wealth that exist in South Africa and are of unique proportions in terms of their share of the world supply. During the last century, for most of the century, all the banks in the old, quote, West, unquote, ran on gold. Gold basically obtained off the backs of cheap black labor. and now close to 80% of the platinum group metals available. And it's not just platinum we're talking about here. There are 6 platinum group metals: palladium, rhodium, iridium, osmium, ruthenium, as well as platinum. There you are. I wrote them down so I would remember them. They're all found in the Bushveld igneous complex in substantially major proportions. The only other really major producer is Russia, and Russian platinum group metals consist largely of palladium. So that under the earth, just north of here, is by far the largest amount of platinum group metals anywhere in the world. Mining technologies for gold and platinum are quite surprisingly to me when I first got into this, quite similar. Although in platinum there are inclined shafts are much easier because the ore runs down from the surface, so one can mine sideways from the surface, as it were, down into the earth, which means that you don't have to have quite so much capital up front to begin with. And there's a certain amount of mechanization possible. In platinum, I believe they use scraper winches more effectively than can be used in gold, where one has to go very deep before one can even begin to hit the ore. But other than that, the reefs are uneven, and as Paul Stewart always points out, you still have to have men with drills underground in South African mining. There have been all sorts of efforts to mechanize South African mining, they've all failed. At least at the level of the kind of tacit skill that's involved in drilling rock in a way that gives you a clean blast. Both gold and platinum, there are similarities here. One of the differences is that the refining of platinum ore takes much longer than gold. Gold ore can be refined in a few days. Platinum ore takes 6 months. And the PGMs, the different platinum group metals, come out at different stages in this refining process. So technically, refining platinum is much, much more complex than refining gold. But the actual mining processes themselves are quite surprisingly similar. And interestingly enough, heat, which is a problem in very deep gold mines, becomes a problem sooner in platinum because it gets hotter sooner when you go down into platinum. Okay, so that's the story there. But it's important to notice that for most of the history of gold mining in South Africa, the price was fixed. The banks bought whatever you could produce. They bought at a rate that was relatively low because South Africa could produce gold off the backs of blacks at a lower rate. And when that started to change in the 1970s, South African gold mines coped with fluctuations in the market by a system of hedging. In PGM mining, by contrast, the industry has been marked by booms and busts, most recently in 2008, but if you look at the history of the industry, it goes up and down. Things have got steadily better since the 1990s when catalytic converters were required for cars, but then there's the question of whether catalytic converters can be recycled. And, the price of platinum is quite unstable as opposed to gold. And the effect has been a pattern of closing mines and laying off people, and then massive scrambles for profits when things get better, and inevitably overproduction, and another dip. So platinum mining has been characterized by a much less stable market, part of which has to do with the way that the mines themselves have worked. Another point, there's no chamber of mines in platinum. The chamber of mines we love to hate doesn't exist with platinum. There's no central organization where producers and capital can get together and to some extent at least police each other, which the chamber certainly did. I spent a lot of time working my way through the chamber archives and chamber minutes. There was a lot of mutual policing that went on with gold mining. Mine managers in platinum, or so it seems to me, have a lot more power. They're much less controlled by outside organization. Subcontracting, lots of subcontracting, way more than in gold. Decisions about dealing with workers. When there's a worker disturbance, it seems to be the local manager that deals with issues. So there's lots more local power exercised in platinum mining than in gold mining. And the companies, especially Amplats and Impala, seem to me to hate each other, to share nothing with each other, so that everything then becomes much more secretive because of deep suspicions between the mining companies. And then finally, the question of land and the nature of land. The gold ore, and this has already been mentioned, the gold ore lay underground that was at one time owned by white farmers who had titles to the land. The mining companies came in and bought the land along with the mining leases. Ernest Oppenheimer bought the farms and built Welkom. With platinum mining, the Bushveld complex consists of land subject to indirect rule. Goes back to the old colonial system, but then it was moved into Bantustans. Dumping grounds for mass removals and places where tribal authorities and trust organizations are the ruling powers. You can't buy land in these areas. What you buy is mining leases, which means that platinum mining is way more complicated because it's mining land that is subject to the traditional authorities. The complications of this issue, the land issue, and the other issues that I'm talking about in platinum have been simply horrendous for the people living there, for the workers, and to a considerable extent, when I talk about workers, I'm not talking only about black workers in platinum. The industry is massive and extremely volatile. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dunbar, for setting the scene so clearly in terms of the shift from gold to platinum and many of the issues that we'll be talking about today. So now we're going to hand over to the next panel and to Zab Rustamji, who's going to chair it, and we'll move straight into that.
Just to answer your question around, why do companies say that the fact they may prefer local labor because it lowers reproduction costs? I think that there's huge differentials between mines, or particularly the big three, on the kind of labor they employ. So for example, Implats employs a whole lot more local labor for historic reasons, whereas Lonmin and Amplats, and particularly Lonmin, employ a whole lot more migrant labor. And when now post Marikana, these minds have had to really start thinking about what do we do about migrant labour. You know, this whole thing has exposed their conditions and exposed the system as being kind of rotten to the core. And so in my interview, for example, with Lonman said to me they've made a decision to move away substantially from employing migrant labour and moving towards local labour. And you know, there were various reasons for this. It was more humane, they're nearer their families and so on. But it also came out very clearly that if you start talking about flying migrants back home regularly and you know, seeing to developing infrastructure, social infrastructure in the rural areas, this is going to be huge expense. Whereas if you're employing local labour, first of all, many people already have homes. They might be living in villages. A lot of young workers that I interviewed, for example, were living with their parents. Were quite happy to do that at that time, although definitely had aspirations to move out at some point and get their own house. It would also, their transport costs, they just see to themselves because they're local, whereas mines often have to foot the bill, particularly if they're TEBA recruited on transportation from rural areas. So it seemed to me that they, and the other thing she said is they've looked at Implats and how Implats employs so much more locally. And that they notice that a lot of people have their own land or their own houses or whatever, and that has lowered their costs considerably. So yeah, I think it's the kind of thinking that's going on around reproduction at the moment. The other question is Son Mobile. You know, I found it fascinating in your presentation yesterday because you started giving the detail of how tribal authorities are doing this recruitment. I mean, I looked at it I've looked at the whole area in very general terms, but one of the things that broker contractors said to me was that they don't recruit very much in foreign migrant labour or indeed migrant labour elsewhere in the country. And often when they want to do that, they go to TEBA and ask TEBA if they can source, rock drillers or whatever, where there's a scarcity and they can't source them locally. And locally, they're sort of both passive and active recruiters, but more passive than anything, because what they do is they go to all the authorities in the area. So they go to municipalities, they go to tribal authorities, and they go to youth activists who are demanding local jobs to recruit for them. They use all these formations to recruit for them. And what they were saying is that they just have a meeting with the local authorities and say, put forward whoever you want to. We don't mind, we need this kind of labour, we need this amounts, and send them across, and then they become on the contractor books. But, the finer detail of how that's done, I didn't go into.
I suppose I presented one side here today because it was only 20 minutes. But I think there's a lot of exceptions, of course. There's a lot of heterogeneity. There's not just one type that's working underground. There are women who are able to maneuver these kind of things and negotiate spaces in a lot of different ways. And one of them is that some adopt masculinity because that is what seems to be a legitimate mine worker identity in these spaces. And so you have women who act like men. I had this woman, 2 of them, they were miners, they were like, I'm a miner, I'm a man at work, and when I get home I have to be a woman, and it's a difficult transition that I constantly have to make a lot of times. So you do have exceptions. And Jeanette, you mentioned that positing women as if they are victims. I think to some degree some of them are victims, and that's a very real, those are real experiences that they've had. And I think particularly when you're talking about their relationships with the unions where they're completely marginalized and their issues are not taken seriously. So I think when you're talking about unions, yes, a lot of women feel like they are victims. When it comes to the workplace, I think again, there's some coping mechanisms that they've adopted, and some of them are about challenging the culture, challenging and contesting the ideas of a mine worker. And there are instances, for instance, where women are called real madoda, when a madoda straight, meaning you are able to transcend the feminine identity and be considered a man because of what you are able to do at work. So I think there are exceptions, but I think in 20 minutes you can't really capture all the variations. And I don't think we should downplay their marginalization when it comes to unions. And so I'll leave that one. But then the gentleman who is from Anku, who talked about women being trained, I think a lot of women have been trained to be a lot of things in mining. But it's not the training that's the problem. It's not the training where things start. It is in the workplace, in the rock face where women are excluded. So yes, they are trained as all these things, as maybe rock drill operators. Where I worked, that was not happening. But when it comes to work, even if you have the skill, sometimes you are not appointed, they call it. You have to be appointed after you've been trained. So you can stay and be and have these skills, but if you're not appointed, you're not going to work as a rock drill operator. But also, training is one part, like I said. When it gets to doing the work, if you're not included in these teams, in these friendships, partly because you don't live with them, and also because you are excluded from the stove, it's very difficult for you to master the art. So it's not just about training women. And then you said that sometimes women exclude themselves, and I think I also found that in my study, where women exclude themselves. But it does not start with them excluding themselves. It starts with the culture, making them feel like they're outsiders, and because of that they respond by excluding themselves. But also other times, it's not just the culture, it's because there's benefits with you being excluded sometimes. Some of them don't want to be in hot, humid conditions, dangerous conditions underground, where a rock can fall anytime, where sometimes you have to crawl and not walk straight. So when someone is saying, okay, go and work in the haulage, they welcome that. So yes, there are instances where they're excluded, but I think we cannot just limit it to that they're excluding themselves. There's also the culture that encourages and in some cases forces them to exclude themselves from these kind of things. And then another one was about, the women in mining forums. I think, you know, when you're a man in some of these cases, you think these structures are there and they're servicing and helping women. But when you're a woman, you get to see what these women in mining forums are doing. A lot of these structures, including the women's structures in unions themselves, they've been reduced to netball organizing structures. They've been reduced to toilet spray, like women complain about, places where women can complain about toilet sprays or about dirty showers. They're not dealing with real issues that are affecting women. And a lot of times when these structures, when women bring up issues in these structures about real workplace issues, they're told, no, these are gender issues, they're not workplace issues. So yes, the structures are there, but they're not dealing with the real issues. And I think that's what we need to be talking about. And so I think, Sonakile, I've addressed your question about exceptions. But also there's something with these there's something about women in mining, just elaborating on the exceptions, that makes them a bit different from men, especially the miners, is that they have education, something that a lot of men don't have. And sometimes they can use that as a leverage. And I had several conversations with white supervisors where they were saying, you know, before women came into mining, we worked very nicely with black workers here because no one questioned us. But now there's women. They come with education, they can question us, they can put us on the spot, and we don't like that. So I think there are a lot of exceptions, but it's difficult again to capture them in 20 minutes. And the Labor Relations Act and vis-a-vis pregnancy, I think it talks to such issues, but again, if you're going to be outside or out of work for 12 months because of an agreement that the union, excluding women, signed with employers, it's very difficult for you to even tap in some things that are provided for you, because you cannot claim maternity benefits for more than 4 months in South Africa. You can claim for 4 months and maybe 6 months depending on agreements, but definitely not more than that. So I think the provisions, but because of the nature of mining, which sometimes forces people to be out of work for more than 12 months or for up to 12 months, it's difficult to work around that. And the wages, there's been a shift. In 2008, there were wage disparities between men and women, and people kept saying, well, it's because women are new, so we cannot pay them the same amounts we pay men who've been in mining for a long time. But I think in 2012, there was a huge shift where they're paid pretty much the same amount. Not exactly the same, because still some men have been in mining, but again, wages of mine workers have not been increasing at a huge rate. So even though there are differences, there's not a huge disparity between the two genders. Women in leadership positions. Yeah, there are women in leadership positions. It depends what you call leadership. I mean, women's structures, women are leading those structures, but the structures are completely powerless. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for your comments, Peter. My initial research, my original paper, actually originated out of a critique of what Hartford has written. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. But Hartford speaks about the crisis of migrancy stemming from, essentially, and I'm reducing things a little bit, but for him the major problem came, or the major sort of turning point came with the demise of the hostels and the institution of the living out allowance. And he sort of sees this as a major break with the past, as this episode where suddenly migrants are exposed to the world of the urban and to all sorts of new costs. And in my longer paper, I sort of problematize this and situate, look at things from more of a historical perspective and show that there's nothing really that new with migrants engaging with the urban areas around the mines. And so you're right, you spoke about stabilization policies in the early 20th century and attempts to experiment with stabilized labor and innovative new housing policies to get migrants to settle permanently and create a class of more permanent workers. And then these ran up against the wall of sort of racist populism, but still, I mean, the gold mines, unlike the diamond mines, weren't totally insulated, and workers often, went into the urban areas, engaged with urban dwellers, were exposed to certain costs. I mean, they didn't live in the urban areas, so to some extent they were sheltered from, the costs of rent and that sort of thing. But there was a lot of interaction there, and that was certainly the case in the platinum mines, where, for instance, Gavin has written about how, and this is sort of later on, but how the struggles of workers coalesced with the struggles of community members and that sort of thing.